This is not a sort of a single solitary high-grade silver vein that we're drilling. This is a cluster of 26 separate vein systems. So we announced a maiden resource of 55 million ounces silver equivalent at a grade of 320 grams per ton silver equivalent. The portion of the project that as of today is fully permitted for underground mining. So we could start underground mining there at any point if we decided to. We're going to have some pretty solid news flow with 4 rigs. They're generating about 5,000 to 6,000 meters a month right now.
Today we're having a chat with Darrell Rader, CEO of Minaurum Silver, a company that very recently released their initial high-grade resource estimate on their flagship project. The company is fully financed with 25 million Canadian dollars in the bank and plenty of catalyst on the horizon from their phase 2 drilling campaign ongoing. Very excited to dive into all those details with you, Darrell, but before we do that, why don't we start with a high-level 30,000 feet overview of your business?
Yeah, thanks for having me. So in a nutshell, Minaurum Silver has been focused in Mexico for quite a number of years here. Its founders and team have had a lot of experience in Mexico. Our founder was Dr. Peter McGaw, who founded Mag Silver, Exelon, a number of the bigger discoveries in Mexico. Over the years, we added a fellow by the name of David Jones, who brought in a number of gold projects into the company that we still have today. He was the discoverer of Los Filos, which at the time was Mexico's largest gold mine. So we have a team that's done it before in Mexico, has permitted mines, has built them, discovered them. I was involved in the production story at Impact Silver that we took from exploration into production down in Mexico DF, sort of central Mexico. I was a founder of a company called Defiance Silver. So I've been in Mexico for about 25 years. More recently, we brought on Ruben Molina as our project manager. Him and his team were the resource modelers for Silvercrest, both 1 and 2. And so we basically have a team that's built mines, discovered them, and we believe that the Alamos project is the next big discovery, and we are advancing it very quickly, as we'll discuss on the interview today. Just as sort of a where we're located, we are located in northern Mexico. We have one of these big historic silver districts that we tied up over several years. So what you're going to be seeing is basically that we took a historic district, found a lot of mineralization that the old timers missed, but discovered a lot of new mineralization as well. And that was realized in our maiden resource, which came out last week. And now I'll also outline sort of where we're going and taking it from in the next 6 to 12 months.
Yeah, definitely a very exciting roadmap that you have outlined, of course, with your drilling very soon to get started. Like you outlined historical district, you've, I believe, captured multiple historical mines in the area, and those old timers were, mining some pretty high-grade stuff, weren't they?
Yes, so our district had over 200 million ounces of high-grade silver production starting in probably about the early 1600s, running to around the time of the Mexican Revolution in the early 1900s. When we talk high grade, we're talking grades typically in excess of a kilo per ton silver. So we have basically 3 big historic mines. The Quintera mine that I'll touch on very briefly in this call that had about 100 million ounces, an average grade of about 2 kilos per ton silver, 3 to 4% copper. We had Promontorio that saw about 70 million ounces of historical production, and Minas Nuevas that saw about 30 million ounces of historical production. So a lot of historical production, but this was the first time when we got involved in the project that it was consolidated into a single project. Back when these mines were running 100 years ago, they were all different mining companies in a bigger area.
Is it then also fair to generalize that this is one bigger system that you've really, captured all these claims for, and it's one big district?
Yes, definitely. We have a number of geological theories why that is, but these areas are entirely connected. This is not a sort of a single solitary high-grade silver vein that we're drilling. This is a cluster of 26 separate vein systems that we have drilled about 17 to 18 of, and 11 of them have returned high-grade results to date. So we have a big sort of backlog of veins to test here, but as we talked about, these veins are stacked vein systems. They're not single veins. It's a big cluster of them. And then also just to mention, we do have a copper silver mine to the north of us called Piedras Verdes, which is privately owned, and undoubtedly they're part of the same system. So one of the things you'll see in this presentation when you look at our grades is you see high-grade silver, and quite commonly comes with high-grade copper. So this is all probably plumbed by the same kind of geological systems is what we see up north of us.
Yeah, that polymetallic nature is very interesting, and I would love to talk about that a bit more, but perhaps in just a bit. Like you already started outlining, of course, you're not an exploration company that's just getting started. You already have a resource estimate on your project. It's already in the tens of millions of ounces of silver, isn't it?
Yes, so we announced a maiden resource of 55 million ounces silver equivalent at a grade of 320 grams per ton silver equivalent. That, of course, is after recovery, so the original grade was a fair bit higher going into the resource. Of that, silver is just over 200 grams per ton, so there's about 35 million ounces of silver in that 55 million ounce silver equivalent calculation.
Yeah, that is very substantial. How many meters of drilling did you include for the resource estimate?
So we included just under 40,000. The entire project has seen just under 60,000 meters of drilling, and this is where I mentioned we have this backlog of drill targets that we can test as we advance the resource. One of the things we did in this project that was a little different, but it comes from sort of our background in silver in Mexico, was when we made a discovery at this project, we didn't want to start drilling it sort of like into Swiss cheese and put holes everywhere. We wanted to figure out, is this just a discrete, small, high-grade silver deposit, or are there a lot more around there? So when we drilled our discovery hole, which was about just under 8 meters of 1,700 grams silver plus base metals on top of that, we didn't drill in that area for another 2 years. We stepped out a kilometer in virtually every direction, tested, as I mentioned, almost 20 separate vein structures on the camp, came back with discoveries on about a dozen of them. And so what we did is we spent I'd say about 20 to 25,000 meters of drilling expenditure simply on proving this is a district. We spent quite a few years doing that, and then now going back and focusing on drilling off the individual targets one after the next. So the maiden resource of 55 million ounces is only focused on portions of 3 of the dozen veins that have returned high-grade results thus far.
Yeah, definitely. And I would love to talk about the upside that you have on your project a bit more in just a second. You earlier highlighted, cross-cutting veins, multiple veins running across each other. That's, of course, very interesting in both the drilling and a mining scenario. If you're able to hit both veins, you get potentially higher grades, but also larger intercepts.
Correct. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to share a slide here in our presentation that sort of illustrates this pretty well. So if you take a look at this slide that I have on the screen here, this is basically showing the yellow boxes are where our maiden resource came from. 55 million ounces silver equivalent, 320, so pretty high grade. These targets are all open at depth and along strike. But when you look at the right side of the screen here, the lower right corner, you see how these zones are not just one big zone, but stacked vein systems, sort of stacked vein systems similar to what you would have seen at Silvercrest's Las Chispas project or Gato Silver. And as you mentioned, the benefits of these is when you are driving and add it in for mining purposes, you're cutting multiple vein horizons, multiple ore zones. And that, of course, not only increases the scale of the entire project, but also when you're drilling off a resource, it allows you to add resources or ounces on multiple veins in every single drill hole, making it more cost effective to increase the size of the resource ultimately.
No, definitely. And of course, also in a mining scenario, veins these close to each other, that's definitely significantly easier to mine, lower cost than it would be to chase just a single vein. Yeah. Hey, Darrell, I would love for it if you could take us along. I believe that you're on a road to 100 million ounces of silver in your next resource. At least that's what the target is. Could you take us along how you think you could potentially get there?
So I think there's a very obvious exploration potential, as I mentioned, on the maiden targets, these 3 boxes here. You can see that there's a lot of other vein systems in the area. One thing I will point out is you can see these red lines in some areas, they stop and then they continue a bit further on. It's not that the veins themselves stop, it's simply those are areas that we haven't completed our surface mapping on. So we have I believe it's something the area of over 30 kilometers, if you put every vein back to back, of vein extent on this project. So there's no shortage of veins. What we want to do is just focus on the ones that have returned high-grade drill results thus far. As I mentioned, about a dozen of them have returned high-grade drill results, and we've only taken 3 into the maiden resource. So what you're going to see is we're continuing to drill on the yellow areas. We currently have 3 drill rigs at Europa. We have another 1 at Quintera. We are anticipating drilling along strike from Europa down to Europa Sur, Promontorio, similar thing down to where it says Promontorio Sur. Other targets that we see a lot of growth potential from are Minas Nuevas to the northwest. You'll see that on the northeast of the map. Minas Nuevas is actually the only historic deposit on our project. It has a historic resource calculated in the 1980s of just around 15 million ounces, grading 300 grams per ton silver. They didn't assay for base metals. And then San Jose to the west of Europa is a very large vein structure where we've returned quite a few high-grade drill results over 1.5 kilometers in length. And those are just sort of multiple targets that we can bring into that, getting to 100 million ounces later on this year. But our objective remains is, as long as we're hitting in the main area where we put out the maiden resource, there's really no reason to jump to some of these other areas yet. We're going to continue in the main area, get them as large as we can, and then when we think we're starting to get into lower grade mineralization or getting near to the end of the mineralized portions of the vein, well, then we have these other ones like San Jose and Minas Nuevas that we can move rigs to and keep adding ounces.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. Of course, you want to, increase the density of your drilling, be very confident of what you have, continue to find the high-grade stuff, and then slowly swell outwards. And what is interesting on this chart that you're currently showing, Darrell, is that there's quite a bit of length to your system already, like you outlined. It's in the order of multiple kilometers. It's also quite a bit of width to it. We could be potentially talking about a really big system that you have here.
Yeah, it's definitely it has the capacity to have created hundreds of millions of ounces, and we already know that because there's already been 200 million ounces historically mined out of it. So we see this as being conceptually, there's a lot more drilling to happen, but we conceptually see this as a 400 million ounce camp, if not slightly larger, of which already 200 million ounces has been mined. So we, as I mentioned at the beginning of this interview, we're not just targeting, leftovers, areas where we've seen a lot of production historically. We're focusing in the gaps. We're focusing on new areas that have seen virtually no historic production, and that's where we're getting these multiple deposits in a very close proximity that are adding ounces as we speak.
Of course, veins pinch and swell. Also, like you outlined, the base metals that you're finding in these veins, they can change with depth. What are you finding in your resource when you go deeper? Are you finding better grades, or is it just different altogether?
So what I'll say with these systems is, and I just pulled up a slide here that shows you what our mineralization, especially the high-grade mineralization, looks like. This boulder down here on the sort of center of the slide comes from Promontorio. Promontorio was a sort of half and half silver, half base metal deposit that came into our maiden resource. It did pull our silver grades a bit lower. Most of our high-grade silver is typically in the 350 to 450 gram range. We brought Promontorio into the maiden resource simply because it was so easy to draw off ounces in Promontorio. Promontorio, a lot of the sort of the larger chutes there measure up to 20 to 30 meters wide, so very easy to add ounces. There were some historically mined areas there, and this is where the boulder comes from, a historically mined area. It's part of about a 3-ton boulder that we uncovered when cleaning out the old workings. The thing to note on this, and the reason I bring it up, is our mineralization is pretty uniform top to bottom as far as grade distribution goes. The only thing that we're seeing that is a little weaker on surface and gets higher grade as we go down the structure is gold. Typically, gold within a 200 to 300 meters of surface is usually sort of in that half gram to a gram. Once we get below 300, we typically see gold go up quite often into the 4 or 5 gram range. This boulder is not that deep, but as you can see, it was running almost 2 ounces per ton gold. But you're also seeing the high-grade silver and, of course, high-grade copper, which gives us the whole greenish color to the rock. You are virtually everywhere in the vein. When you're seeing high-grade silver, you see high-grade copper. Our silver mineral is called stromayerite and is basically a copper-silver sulfide. So basically everything but gold is pretty uniform top to bottom, but as you get deeper, gold goes up.
That's incredible. And, some of the grades that you were outlining, of course, for underground mining, it's different. But some of those grades you were outlining, a, heap leach mine would be happy with by standalone. And for you guys, if you were to go into a production scenario, eventually at least someone, and we'll talk about the long-term plans in just a second, those grades would, be a really nice byproduct credit.
Yeah, it is so heavily mineralized. One of the things you have to do ultimately is decide, what are you going to take more of? What are you going to take a little less of, maximizing your sort of net smelter return on the mineralization that you process. But we're currently doing metallurgical testing. We've done a fair bit of metallurgical testing so far. Most of the metallurgical testing we've done so far has been really focused on finding deleterious elements, making sure that this is a clean mineralization. And the 3 sort of earlier stage tests we've done so far have shown that this is clean. What we're now doing is we're in the middle of a multi-month metallurgical testing program, which is really focusing on which metals do you want to prioritize recovery on. You, of course, are going to recover all of them, but ultimately, just due to prices, you're obviously going to prioritize silver, gold, and copper as the 3 you do want to maximize recoveries on. You may have to leave a little bit of zinc and lead behind to do that, but it's a great situation to be in where you can kind of pick and choose, and you're not just relying on one metal, one market for your mineralization. You sort of cover the whole spectrum.
Definitely, that's a huge benefit of a polymetallic resource potentially in a mining scenario. Hey, Darrell, on this project, is it 100% yours?
Yes, the project is 100% ours. I'm just going to flip back to the slide I was at here. Actually, this slide will do the trick too. So if you look at this slide here, it does show in the middle a map that shows the Piedras Verdes mine to the north of us, and it shows this inset, which is sort of a white dotted inset on a much larger area. So of our project, we own 37,000 hectares of mineral claims. Of the 37,000 hectares, we've only focused on the core 5,000 hectares, which is what you see enlarged here on the left. And that is all 100% owned. There are some royalties. Most of them can be bought down to about a 1.5% royalty level, so pretty low royalty. The cost is about $1 million Canadian to buy these royalties down. And then the other thing to note is this area here, why we focused here to start, is this is where the historical production occurred. This is where the full 200 million ounces was historically mined. And this is the portion of the project that, as of today, is fully permitted for underground mining. So we could start underground mining there at any point if we decided to.
Yeah, that's something that you very quickly highlighted there, your permitted status. That's very unique for an explorer or developer, that you already have the permit to go underground.
It's something when you work in Mexico long enough, you discover that the most difficult thing to do in Mexico is to find a silver district or any large mineral deposit naturally, but especially a silver district. High-grade silver deposits are not rare in Mexico. It may take a while for you to find them because a lot of them were historically mined. Quite often, you can find projects that have high-grade silver, 30, 40 million ounces. It's when they get over 50 that you start getting less and less, and then there's a lot less when you get to, excuse me, when you get to 100 million ounces, there's a lot less of those, and then past that point, you get to the point where you can kind of count them on one hand. So, as I mentioned, when we came into this project and we made a discovery, we wanted to say, okay, let's make sure this isn't an isolated high-grade silver shoot. It's a district. There's a lot more to be found. So we pretty quickly determined that that's true, that there are a lot more to be found. Then we said, okay, having operated Mexican mines in the past, one of the key things we can do here is prove that this can be moved forward to production. We didn't want to do the sort of the traditional route of drilling off a discovery, doing engineer studies, then start your permitting process, because we know, having built mines in Mexico in the past, permitting is pretty well takes longer than anything else you can do in Mexico, including mine construction, including drilling. So as soon as we were on the discovery road, we knew we had something there. We went, headfirst into the permitting process. And the nice thing is for, 2017, 18, 19, as we were drilling off the discovery, proving this is a district, behind the scenes, we were spending millions of dollars, countless hours permitting the project, but there was no pressure from the market to get our permits because they were focused on our drill results. Now, of course, when you look at the market, you see a number of our peers there that have now drilled a couple 100 million ounces, and are sort of just waiting around, hoping they get their permits in the next 6 months. We did that process, and now, as we're finally getting resources out, the permits are ready to go. The permitting, I would say, is a bit further advanced than we had initially anticipated. Main reason for that was simply COVID really slowed us down on the project. There were almost 2 years where we could only do smaller drill programs because the communities in the area were pretty hard hit by COVID. But the thing is when the drilling was slowing down, there was no need to slow down the permitting, so that entire process just continued through. So where we're today is we have full underground mining permits for this core part of the claims, meaning unlimited tonnage, unlimited underground mining. We have road construction permits. We are in the process of getting blasting permits. We have full community agreements covering 25 years with all the communities in this 5,000 hectare area, covering exploration through exploitation. So really what it is because we've done this in the past, we know what a major's going to want to see on this project. And you've probably seen some of the interviews from guys like Keith Neumeyer at First Majestic and Steinman over Pan American. When they're asked in interviews, what are you guys looking for as your next acquisitions? They're, typically what you hear from them is over 100 million ounces, good grades, but de-risked and permitted, either producing or near-term production. And in my sort of view, if you don't have the permits, you're definitely not near-term production because that's a big unknown. So my idea is we already have our permits. We need to get as fast as possible to that level where we know the big guys are looking. So for us, that means getting over 100 million ounces as fast as possible, which we're now doing in our fully financed 50,000 meter drill program. And then continuing to just de-risk the project. The communities are done now. Now we're working on water. We're finalizing explosives. It's just a matter of we want to be in a situation where when we get to PEA level sort of work, which will be hopefully later on this year, we'll already be over 100 million ounces, and most of the boxes to production have already been checked off at that point. And that's what you're going to see basically in news flow. Besides drill results, there's going to be a lot of de-risking news flow as well over the next 10 to 12 months.
Excellent, Darrell. Really appreciate that overview on the permitting side. It definitely sounds like a really interesting strategy to be more advanced on the permitting than required at this stage. There's multiple ways to monetize a resource, like you already started outlining. You could potentially, be acquired by a major. You could potentially develop it yourself and start producing silver and cash flows. What type of framework? How is the management team of Minaurum looking at this project and thinking about potentially monetizing the asset in the future once you are at that 100 million ounces and beyond?
I think there's an adage in our industry that basically goes like, if you build your company to sell it, you never sell it. But if you build it to eventually produce and it's a real asset, you'll always be sold. Especially if you're single asset and there's that desire to entertain offers as they arise. So our view on this project is right now is focus on exploration, continue to de-risk the production side, but we're putting the framework into place that at some point we can decide to take this into production. We're putting the team together. We're still doing a lot of hiring. As I mentioned, we brought on the entire resource modeling team that worked at Las Chispas, that worked at Santa Elena, and saw those resources grow and go into production. So we've put a team together that knows how to do this, and we believe with Alamos, just looking at the environment of what has been purchased in the last 12 months in our industry, you see Mag Silver, which is kind of a unicorn. That's a massive, massive deposit. I don't see virtually anybody like that in Mexico right now. But at the same time, it was only 40% controlled by Mag. But when you have real grades, you get real offers, and they sold. Silvercrest, of course, was high grade single asset producer, in that 8 to 10 million ounces per annum range. Gato Silver, very similar situation. There was the Electrum Group. They got rid of Dawa as a sort of joint venture owner. They consolidated ownership, and once again, that sort of 7 to 9 million ounce producer, single asset. That's exactly what the big guys are looking for. So when we're looking at that longer stage, one of the things that we've been doing with our permitting, with our water procurement, with our road construction, is we know that whatever we find here has to slot into that sort of 7 to 10 million ounce per annum producer at some point. So if you're going to do 7 to 10 million ounces per annum, you need to have probably conservatively at least 120 million ounces drilled off. So with dilution and recoveries, you can support that kind of production level for at least 10 years. And then, of course, you need to make sure you have the infrastructure to produce those kind of levels, and of course, all the permits. Even things like explosives, people don't realize that explosives can be an issue in Mexico too, especially where you permit for a smaller amount, and then politics change, and then you have to go back to the community 5 years later and say, actually, we need to store twice as much, and maybe politics have changed in the communities. You have to do it all from the get-go. So everything that we've permitted thus far in our project has been targeting that sort of what you would need for a 7 to 10 million ounce per annum producer. So that's where we're pushing the company towards. That's what we're de-risking towards. And right now, as I mentioned, though, our focus remains on getting the resource in place to substantiate that as fast as possible, and then know that we're on a running start to finally permitting and getting that all into that level of getting it to production ultimately.
Yeah, no, perfect outline. Really appreciate that, Darrell. You recently raised 25 million Canadian dollars, if I'm not mistaken. How far does that take you, Darrell?
So that will, in all likelihood, probably take us to I'd say probably the introduction work on a PEA. We are just doing some more hiring right now to get us into position for a PEA once we get a revised resource out later this year. We have the 25 million covers probably about 60,000 meters of drilling. Our announced program is 50,000 meters of drilling. We're pretty confident that 50,000 will get us past the 100 million ounce mark, silver equivalent, which is what we need in order to continue to differentiate ourselves from some of our peers. Getting to complete a PEA is a bit more difficult to sort of predict at this point, because one of the things you're going to have to do in a PEA, of course, is spend a lot more money upgrading the resource from inferred into indicated categories, if not even a little bit higher than that. When you're looking at that kind of a situation in Mexico and how to differentiate from our peers, one of the things we focused on right now is not drilling off better categories at this point yet. It's really just making the resource as big as we can, as quickly as we can, and then once we start moving into PEA, start doing that upgrading. But that being said, that's only a portion of our money at that point. One of the things we want to continue is to continue drilling and increasing the size of the resource as well. So while we have 4 rigs right now, we're working on adding a few more rigs. Once we get to 100 million ounces, we'll probably take half the rigs, allocate it to PEA level drilling, and then the other, whatever it is, leftover rigs, 2 to 3 rigs, will focus purely on resource expansion and continuing to grow that resource as big as we can.
Excellent. Darrell, could you talk to us about Catalyst for a second? Of course, we've talked about this quite a bit already, but just summarizing, what should investors look out for the next couple of months for Minaurum Silver?
Yeah, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to flip here to a slide quickly. I'm putting up the slide for Europa Guadalupe. I've sort of talked on, this was one of our maiden resources areas. What you're going to see over the next 3 to 4 months is a lot of drill results, especially from this zone, because this is a zone that just keeps drilling. As you mentioned very astutely, these vein systems pinch and swell. So, I call them kind of like strings of pearls. You get a shoot, and then the vein continues, but it's not really, it's there, but it's either not high grade or it's pretty narrow and high grade, and then it forms into a larger shoot again. And we're seeing that kind of shooty behavior as we drill along strike. So one of the things we're doing at Europa here is the purple represents our current resource. We are drilling where these stars are. So right now we have a rig in the northern area over here that's drilling. We have one that's drilling in this area looking at expansion of current resource. And then we have another drill over here where this green dot is to the right, also drilling. Now, if you go another half a kilometer south of this green point, you get to a single solitary drill hole that we drilled, I'd say about 4.5 years ago, that hit approximately 700 grams over 1.5 meters, pure silver. I don't remember the silver equivalent grade, but in all likelihood, that's probably the start of another shoot along this vein system. So the idea is just on a sort of modularized basis, target each area with one rig and just expand this in all the directions. make it as big as we can before moving the rigs to other targets. So this is one that you're going to be seeing a lot of drill results come out on. This is one that's going to be, I would venture to forecast at this point or guess that probably the majority of our resource growth from 50 to 100 million ounces will come out of Europa Guadalupe, the way it's shaping up. It is a high-grade silver system. The other thing you're going to be seeing a few drill results from, and I'll just put up this slide, which is our path to 100 million ounces, is Travessia here in red was one of our maiden resource areas. It was just a small addition, about 5 million ounces. But Quintera is an area where we now have a drill rig on. We're actually drilling Travessia because these are stacked veins. So we're drilling Travessia, and then further on in the same holes, we're also bisecting the Quintera stacked vein system. So we're adding ounces on multiple veins. The thing about Quintera is sort of, kind of like our Bubby Canora, which is what Silvercrest had. If you know the Silvercrest story, at Las Chispas, they had a very strong, I'd sort of call it strong 300 to 400 gram kind of vein system that they put in their maiden resource. But it was when they were putting their decline in to access it, they crossed Bubby Canora, which ended up becoming their super high grade 700-800 gram per ton, silver vein that probably had 100 million ounces by itself. We see that kind of potential at Quintera, and Quintera was a historical 100 million ounce producer. It's pretty small as far as volume goes, simply because it was over 2 kilos per ton silver, so it didn't take a lot of mineralization to get to 100 million ounces. We see the potential for more Quinteras on the project. I can tell you at this point we haven't hit any more Quinteras yet, but as we systematically go along these veins, that potential does exist. But what we're doing at Quintera right now is we're drilling it partially to find remnant mineralization, because we know a lot was left behind. They typically didn't mine anything under 500 grams per ton silver, but also looking at extensions along strike and at depth in virgin mineralization. So that we're drilling right now, and that's going to be much higher grade silver than, say, the Promontorio system, which was, as I mentioned in the beginning, a bit of a lower grade system. So you're going to see drill results from Europa, from Travessia, Quintera, and Promontorio. Every drill result that you see from this point outward is going into the next resource. All the drill results for the maiden resource have already been announced. So we're going to have some pretty solid news flow with 4 rigs. They're generating about 5,000 to 6,000 meters a month right now. The other items that you're going to see on the catalyst side is basically developer level work that we're doing on the project. There's a couple of areas that we've already started to define potential locations for infrastructure processing facilities. We have already done a lot of road construction work, but we're continuing to survey in more roads, dedicated roads that Minaurum would own. Water rights, we have already tied up a lot of water rights. We've done quite a number of water wells up to this point. So while those kind of catalysts aren't market-moving catalysts per se, they're the kind of catalyst that the industry perks up when they see that. Our peers that are out there looking for acquisitions, they like to see that kind of work done. They like to see, know that you have enough water tied up. You have your communities tied up. There's things that we do work on the community side of things that aren't catalysts for the market, but are catalysts for the industry when they look at us. And that includes things, we have some presentations on our website, but we have everything from microloan systems in all 3 communities on our project that we seed financed, usually a minimum of $25,000, and then those are like microloans, $100, $200 here and there to community members for various needs. And those systems have been in place for about 6 years, and we haven't actually had to refinance any of them yet. And they're administered by the leaders of the communities. So people are paying back the loans and generating more. So that's been generating economic activity. We have a very large agave plantation that we basically gave to the community to stimulate economic activity, and a lot of the community's women are working there, and they are now actually soliciting outside loans to build a distillery to produce tequila and things of that nature. We have a plantation, sort of a nursery for, sort of plant life that is indigenous to the area. So we were already, growing new cacti and things where we can reclaim historic mining areas. We've done, we have Christmas parades and parties in all the communities. the thing is when you have a very solid community relationship, it isn't just, okay, you get the license to operate in their community, like we have these 25-year agreements. It also creates a very secure environment. It makes the locals take ownership of the project a bit. And we've seen that in these communities. We hire a lot locally. Nice thing having Mexico's third largest open pit copper mine to the north of us. Most of the communities on our project already have employees for that mining company living there. So they like mining. It is a sort of bedrock economic driver, these communities. And that all just comes into place with the security side of things. When you have good relations, you work there a long time, the locals work there, it creates a really great place to work, and that's something that we'll continue to put news out, and as I mentioned, more for the industry, less so for investors. But there are also investors, of course, too, that like to know that you can operate and do what you say you're going to do in a timely manner.
Definitely, the social license is incredibly important, Darrell. Hey, is there anything that we might have missed that's important for the Minaurum Silver investment case?
I would say moving forward, I think we hit on the highlights. One thing I didn't mention, as you'll see from our presentation on our website and online, is we aren't a single asset company. One of the things we did over the years is we built a pipeline of projects with the idea that the top project, as you're drilling, you're obviously killing a lot of projects, but when you make a discovery and you develop that one, there's sort of a portfolio of projects, a pipeline that can replace that one when the time comes. That being said, for Minaurum, 95% of our time and money is at Alamos, but we do have other deposits in the company, a base metal deposit in Nevada that we're doing a little bit of work on. We have a project called Santa Marta that we don't talk about much, but it is a district scale copper project in southern Mexico. So there's more value drivers than Alamos, but Alamos is 95% of our time and money moving forward.
Well understood. Darrell, where can people, investors that are still watching the video, find out more about your company, potentially reach out?
Sonny Panu, our IR Corp Dev individual, is a great person to touch base with. You can see his email address there, panu@minaurum.com. You can always give us a call as well. If you're trying to reach out to me, I like to tell people I travel a lot. I'm an operator. I spend a lot of time on the ground in operations. So I'll get back to everybody, but sometimes it may take a week or two if I'm on the road down in Mexico. But we always enjoy responding to investor inquiries as we get them.
Excellent, Darrell. Really appreciate your time today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.